Good evening. My name's Russ Perisky, and I'm the founder of Paradigm Education Group. What we're going to do tonight is what we call our Introduction to Your Human Rights educational course. What it is, it's a compression of our full course, the Canadian Illusion, which is about 12 and a half, 13 hours long. So you're probably going to come out at the end of this with a lot of questions because we just don't have time tonight. But what we're going to do, tonight's course is broken really into two halves. Before the break, we're really going to deal with who you are and what human rights are in relation to this country and how they apply and why it's important to know them, and give you some tools to see through what this thing that we call the Canadian Illusion. We had to give it a name, so that's basically what it was. And then we have a break, and then after that, we're actually going to take this information and start going inside some of the laws of this country. Now, Paradigm Education Group started years ago before it even had a name. And so to give you a little bit of background to where this all grew out of, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself, as I've lived out in Chilliwack since early 80s, and I've been in construction for all those years. And basically it was the early 90s, about 1993, I got something in the mail. It was mass mailed all across this country, and some of you might have even got it. It was years ago. And what it was sent out by the Michael Journal out of Quebec. And it looked sort of like a newspaper, and what it talked about was a lot of the legal foundation of this country. It talked about the banks in this country, it talked about income tax, and a whole, how that all fit together. And that was my first exposure to this whole topic of our legal system and everything. Like, we all got lives, and we sort of look at stuff like that as something we never spend any time on. And I hope through tonight you'll be able to see that it is worthwhile spending some time on learning what's going on in this country, and especially who you are in this country, because that's where a lot of your freedom will come from. And so what happened out of that, I started reading that, and it really put a lot of the pieces together. Looking back, it was fundamentally flawed because this was a long journey by a lot of people across this country trying to put pieces together. It basically came to the conclusion that income tax was unconstitutional. And so I studied the stuff, and I saw it, and I adopted that position for a while. And because when you look at the pieces, it looks like that income tax was illegal or was unconstitutional. So as time went on, I had really got educated up to that point from that perspective. And because of the nature of my employment, I was self-employed. And anybody here who's self-employed knows is in relation to income tax, you get to write a lot of stuff off. So during the early years of my working there and stuff, I just studied the game of how to play the income tax game. And when you're self-employed, you get a lot more deductions and stuff like that. And so I got it to a point where basically, not only did I have my construction company, I had a side business, so I was a walking, talking tax deduction. I studied the game. But when I did that, then I started realizing what an unfair system. See, right next door to me lived some friends of ours, and they were both very highly educated. They did what they were told to do, what we're all told to do. You grow up, you get a good education, so you get a good job. Notice how they never finished that story for us, right? Well, add a few years onto your life once you've done everything they told you, and my neighbors were a perfect example of it. We both lived side by side. We both had the same amount of kids, and because of this whole thing, the income tax game and stuff, because I knew how to play it, I could support my family with just one income. We were a little bit old-fashioned. We thought parents were supposed to raise their own kids and stuff like that. But they were forced, just economically forced, that they both had to go to work. And it finally got so bad that they couldn't really maintain a comfortable lifestyle. I mean, they were just putting in so many. So they packed up and they moved down to Texas. And we all heard that through the news years ago. That's called the brain drain, right? And the only reason they moved down there was because they had a lower tax bracket. So that was sort of not only seeing the inequity of that, and then learning the stuff that I started studying primarily because of this article. I made a decision never to file again. And I still thought I had a very justified position for that. Because I was self-employed, I could literally file and get my income on paper down to zero. And what that did, it triggered the benefits. All the child tax benefits and this and that. GST wasn't out at the time. But all those benefits, because they're all based on your income. A lot of people still do that today when you know how to play the game. So I figured, well, considering the amount of work and the paperwork it takes to track everything you do all year long and then compile it and put it all down, I thought, well, you know, it would make logical sense. If I quit filing, then they would save all this money on sending me benefits. Thought it was a fair deal, right? So I did that, and I figured they'd like that, and I was half expecting a thank you letter from them for being responsible and stuff like that. I realized something, it was nothing to do with the money. This whole game had nothing to do with money. It was all about control, you know? So I got a letter, and it wasn't a thank you letter for saving the country money, okay? It was basically a summons to go to court. During that process of getting to court, I actually got to a point where I could not, no matter how much they threatened me, I just could not file. I had seen too much at that point, you know? And so we were willing to go to court, and I was willing to get the full maximum penalty. It's just, to me, it was just a wrong thing that was going on. So basically, what happened when we went to court the first time, my education had progressed to the point where I heard of this thing called a natural person. And it was a real fundamental. We're going to go through a lot of this tonight to show you where, you know, almost the progress that I went through and the progression of the learning curve. I didn't really understand it, but it was real simple. A natural person was a human being, and this thing they called an artificial person wasn't. So I went to court, and I think I caught them off guard because they had known my background. They knew I was studying it from the unconstitutional perspective, and they probably thought I was going to come in there and argue the unconstitutional argument or something. So I walked in. When we went to court, I had like 3 different folders with 3 different defenses, because that time in the history of this country, there was groups all over this country trying to figure out what was going on. And that's why even tonight's course, we're going to focus on income tax, but I hope you don't leave here thinking all we talked about was income tax. Because when you take it outside the income tax field, you realize this whole topic of your human rights and how you fit into this country, this information you'll learn tonight will apply into all different aspects. But for tonight, you know, because of the time stretch and stuff, we're going to just focus on income tax, and because that was the start of my journey too. And so we went to court, and I had all these different arguments that I was going to progress. Because we live out in Chilliwack, which from the city's perspective, it's sort of an inconvenient to drive into all these meetings stuff. So we never really plugged into any group or anything. We were just quietly trying to keep my own butt out of jail out there. But because of the internet, I was able to study. There was groups all across this country. And so studying, and especially from the unconstitutional perspective, and I realized that nobody had ever had any results arguing unconstitutional. I saw about 6 or 7 court cases go to the door of the Supreme Court, and they just said, nope, we're not even going to hear it. So it left me with a decision. It's either, well, either our court system's corrupt, some will argue that, or maybe it is constitutional. And what that did, it started me looking at it a different way. Looking at it, how could they have made this thing legal? And so as we sat in court, I was talking to my wife, and I'm trying to figure out which argument to do best, right? And I had one file with all my court papers in it. And what was really unique about that is, because I had all my papers together at one point, I started noticing something. My name was spelled different on all the papers. And I knew at that point, I heard something called a nom de guerre, which talked about capitalization, your name and stuff like that. So I was saying, well, wonder what this is about. So I asked my wife, should I even bother arguing about the capitalization of my name? She never answered me, and I never answered myself, which was like a blessing in disguise. They called my name, I stood up, and the first thing out of my mouth, I said, you know, excuse me, Your Honor, could you be so kind and ask the Crown who they intended to summons here, the natural person or the artificial? And wow, what a reaction. That Crown flew out of his chair, waving my court papers. Your Honor, he's trying to challenge the whole system, specifically the legal system. I'm going, what? I'm just asking a question. Well, to this day, they've never answered that question. But because they never answered it, what happened in the court case, the judge made some orders. One, he made an order that I was a natural person. Whether it existed or not, he made an order. Another, he made an order that I was the defendant. I was the person they were trying to charge. So that whole court case progressed all the way up to a couple more hearings and stuff, and we finally went and set a court date, and it was 11 months into the future, which was really nice. So we studied. It's like, well, if we're going to court, we better start studying this stuff. And we went to used bookstores, got law dictionaries. We went on the internet, went into